not to give their last name. And sometimes it's as simple as the child is young and doesn't yet know, but why wouldn't they know their last name? Because their parents haven't told them. And it's not just that, as Indians, many of us don't really have last names in the Western sense of the word. Most adults are at least interacting somewhere in the world where they have to put down a second word, a surname. And so I've learned to ask, "Aap apna pura naam batayenge? Will you please tell me your full name?" And I've learned to hear the person say, "Nahi, my name is only, Ziaul." And okay, Ziaul, that's fine. And a little push, but not much, because we know what's going on there. And that's another institution we're dealing with. One last thing about the education system. It does not prepare people for libraries. It does prepare people, at least to the extent that most of the kids who enter our library, like let's say 80% of them, have some level of reading skill that the school has handed them. When we first started doing the library, all of us volunteers and me on staff, we talked about the low-hanging fruit. We were reaching for those kids who could read already. And what we are doing in the libraries, we're teaching narrative to kids. We're teaching them to think about themselves, to introspect, to find themselves, to see the book as a mirror in which their story is there, or their story is not there, and why not, This thing that we're doing with them is completely sort of negated in the school system. And why is it negated in the school system? Because the school system exists formally from a time when the colonial government in India set it up, when the British colonial government, to create clerical workers to administer the colony, right? So it did not want people to think, right? So we've inherited that school system. I would argue even the private schools in Delhi right now, as schools in most parts of the world, are simply there, and the curriculum they create is simply there to replicate the society we live in, with all of its inequalities, with its caste system intact, with its class, with its access. So to the extent that we are handing kids a book, we are probably just doing a good deed or a social service, or in our spare time trying to do one small good thing in the world. To the extent that we're actually saying that curriculum is not doing justice to you as a human being, and this is what we're going to do in the library, which is reading is thinking, which means when you come into the library and you've never encountered as a book as a mirror for your soul. So I'm going to open one and show you how that works. To the extent we're doing that, we view our work as political work, and as work that runs counter to the work other institutions, formal institutions, are doing in the lives of our members. So that is...
I just wanted to tell them about an instance about what she was talking about, how it's a narrative and how they make them think rather than read. So books are not just for reading, writing, or arithmetic as we normally think it is. I volunteer at their library, and one day I found this girl who must have been 13 years old. She came up and she said she wanted to register. And we asked her her name, she rattled it off. Her name was Beauty. Then we asked her parents' name and everything she just rattled it off. So I then sort of, gave the registration form to her, and I said, why don't you write your phone number? She said, but I know my phone number, and she rattled it off again. So I said, why don't you just write it down, your sister's name? So she says, because I can't read. So, and I looked at her and I'm, okay. Which class are you in? So she says, I'm in class 8. So she has been in what is a formal structure, a formal education system for almost 8 years, and she still can't read. And 3 months after she enrolled, and I gave her a book just to see, whether and she was a regular. She would come, she would take the books, she would go back, and in 3 months I asked her to read out a story, which was a picture book story. But she made her own narrative and her own story, and she could actually, read out a story to me. And I think that was amazing. That was something that their structure taught her, which the formal structure hadn't.
We have about 4,500 books in the library now. For 600 people, we really should have about 6,000, so it's a bit of a gap. And of course, some of that is the adult collection is meant for adults. So in that sense, probably our kids really have access to about 3,000, 3,500 books. Out of that, 900 roughly are picture books, and these are all picture books. There are some Hindi picture books in our library and some English ones. I only brought one Hindi picture book with me today. This is one I've read in the youngest group quite a few times. And Romania is a very frustrating story because Romania is really cute and it's a great read aloud because the pictures are so awesome and everybody in our community has been to a wedding and it's the highlight of like at least one a month. So it's the highlight of the month to go to a wedding, and she has so many clips in her hair, and I always make a note of all those things when I'm talking to the kids because those are worth noting, and we're trying to find ourselves in there, right? So look at her, she's wearing the clip and she goes to the wedding with Nana and Nani, and then the frustrating part of the story for me, and because I'm thinking when I read, which means I'm not just reading the sound of the words, I'm also listening to the voice in my head that's thinking about what those sounds are saying to me. When I read to the kids, I in a read aloud, I'm doing two things. I'm reading as a teacher or a child who knows how to read. I'm making the sounds of the words. But I'm also, without hopefully ruining the story, sharing bits of my second voice, my thinking voice, with my audience. So that when I get to the frustrating part, which is she gets lost at the wedding, and our Nani is like one complacent human being because she decides that the Nani actually says in a very kind of lesson sort of way to herself, and so we, the reader, get to hear her saying that all things that get lost come back, and you know everything ends well. And I've never liked books that say everything ends well. So, and even in LKG, I make free with that thought, and I put it out there, and I say I lost my kid once. It was in Seattle, and he was like 3 or 4, and it was horrible. And then I asked them, you know, like we might even interrupt the story, although normally I save it for the end. I'll say, have you been lost? And you know, they find themselves in the book. Whether they find that they're not Romania and their Nani is not like Romanians, or they find that they are and they like the clips and they like to wear clips. And we're going to read a story together right now. It's called Moon in the Pot. And I picked this story. It's not one I've read in our library because it's a bit challenging right now. In the year that we've had kids, one of the challenges for us has been we have had kids who are up here, like they can get anything, like they would leave all of us in this room in the dust. Their grasp, the depth of their, you know, their thinking is formidable, and that's a handful of kids. And every time 5 of them come in the room and we get excited, they leave because our program keeps having to meet everybody else. So it's a real balancing act for us as we try to talk to the 500 people and the 5 people at the same time. So I haven't had occasion to read this book, although we have at least 5 people or more in the library who could benefit from this. I'm really looking forward to this. I have, of course, read it ahead of time, as all good read aloud volunteers do, and thought hard about what book would I bring to you here today. And Moon in the Pot is written by Gopini Karunakar. And I will say a very interesting thing about this book, as we know books are made by people and Gopini is a writer, but the really interesting thing is she seems to be part of some, or directed by some sort of collective called the Anveshi Different Tales team. I recognize Susie Taru's name on this. Susie Taru, who created those volumes of Indian women's writing, volume 1, 2, 3, I think, which is like the text that we all turn to when we think about Indian women's writing, and a number of other names I don't recognize. But these are the people who developed 4 different tales, stories from marginal cultures and regional languages, an initiative of Anveshi Research Center for Women's Studies, Hyderabad. And when I read this story, something that I was struck by is that it's not like a lot of other stories we read where there's like a beginning and then it kind of rises up into this arc and then an ending. And that's a kind of a Western thought narrative structure. This story has many stories, one inside the other. We're familiar with the Mahabharata or the Ramayana in this room. We know that there are other narrative forms, and a story that opens other stories is one narrative form, right? But even in those, we could sort of see these arcs. So as I'm reading it, I would ask you to think about, pay attention to your thinking voice, because the reason I'm doing this today is giving you hopefully give you the experience of what our kids, when they come in, and are asked to wake up their thinking voice experience. Your thinking voice is so awake and you use it so often, it's become you. So I'm not sure how often you think about the fact that you think. We are actually trying to move kids from not thinking when they read. They think all the time. They think in the Mother Dairy line about making sure they get their turn, right? They are thinking people. We make them the door as thinking people. Then we tell them they can think with books, which is what all of us in this room do. We are also hoping to move through the curriculum we design and implement, move children through a process where they go from not thinking with books, just reading books as their education system has required them to extract discrete pieces of information, memorize, and get the job that maybe is incrementally better than the one their parents had, or maybe the same, at least to not lose ground. We're hoping to move from that to thinking as they read, to then becoming aware that they are thinking as they read. That's the metacognition step. This is where we actually, this year, have enough kids in the room that we can do writing workshops with them. And we've started doing writing workshops with kids. And it's gone really well. So they're writing poetry, they're writing all kinds of things, and they're learning how to write, which requires them to know that they are writers. Moon in the Pot, like a lot of literature, has some really big ideas in it. And I think one of the really great ideas in this book is the idea of what is real and what is not. I think if you look at any book, they're all of them asking you to think about, is love real? Am I real? Am I really here? Maybe I'm the only real people and you're all a person and you're all like just acting, or maybe you're all real and I'm not. And this story is a mixture of interesting fantasy and interesting reality. And if you listen to it, and I will skip chunks of it, you might start thinking about the question of what is real here and something elsewhere, but it's really Moon in the Pot. Gudava took the moon out of the pot hanging from the roof and hung it up in the sky. Moonlight rained heavily everywhere. It's a little hard to see maybe in the back, but here's Gudava, and here's the pot inside the door of her house, and here's the sky, and she's taken the moon, and you can see from her arms that she's hung it up in the sky. And I wonder if that's real. Golden moonlight on the milky mountain, moist moonlight on the rocks and boulders, silver moonlight shimmering on the waves of the lake's sweet water, ripe moonlight on the fresh green fields, tender shoot moonlight on the tamarind trees, milky moonlight on the white wings of the crane. Can you see the crane? It's in the upper corner here. The whole village rocked gently on the moonlight swing hanging from the sky. Maybe this is a little bit of the moon. Tonight, Gudava will once again put away the moon in the pot hanging from the roof. I will wake up before she does and steal the moon from the pot and hide it away somewhere. Let's see what she does then. Every day she promises to give it to me, but never does. So when I started, I thought the story was just about Gudava, but there's an I in the story. Someone is telling us the story. In the summer one evening, it rained very heavily. That night, the flame of the forest tree in our backyard blossomed with stars. My little brother, Piru Babu, my little sister, Vasanta, and I went near the tree. The tree glittered bright with stars. Vasanta looked at the tree in wonder and, covering her mouth with her hands, exclaimed, "Oya Ma, so many trees, so many stars." I caught hold of a branch and shook it. The stars fell to the ground like flowers. We gathered the stars in our clothes and ran to Gudava. We call her Gudava because she has only one eye. The stars glittered in our hair, on our clothes. We shone brightly as if we wore stars for flowers in our hair and starry shirts and frocks. Pointing to the star on her frock, Vasanta said, "Awa, look, so many stars." "But they are not stars, they're fireflies," said Gudava. "Fireflies? What are they, Awa?" I asked. I think if you look closely, you'll see there's 3 kids in the story. Piru Babu, and Vasanta, the girl, and I think the I is the tall boy in the center here, under the tree. He's the one holding the branch and shaking it, so I think that's I. Come sit close to me, I'll tell you, said Gudava. We all sat near her, and that picture of her, that's the one we saw on the cover page. Gudava and the 3 children. We all sat near her. We threw the fireflies into the air and they landed on grandmother's sari drying on the clothesline. Gudava began telling us the story of fireflies. So here we have inside the story of Gudava and her 3, I think, grandchildren. They have a story of fireflies. As the moon endlessly rubs against the sky, the chaff falls to the ground. These fireflies are nothing but that chaff. Once a bunch of golden sparrows went to heaven and appealed to God. You know what they said? They said, Almighty God, at night human beings light lamps in their houses. Cobras have a shining jewel on their heads. The bulging eyes of owls serve them as lamps, but our nests are full of darkness. What should we light our nests with? We have babies and young children. Take pity on us. God was moved by their piteous pleas. He said, the moon has been rubbing against the sky for so long, there's all this moon chaff. You can gather it and line your nests. You will have your light then. Since then, the sparrows always plaster their nests with soft mud to stick moon chaff. So the lamps inside the golden sparrow's nest are these fireflies, said Gudava. And that's one story Gudava tells inside this story that a boy is telling us about himself and Gudava. I began to think, if moon chaff can give so much light, how much more light can the moon give? How nice it would be if I could get a piece of the moon and stick it inside a golden sparrow's nest. One evening, as I lay with my head in Gudava's lap, I pointed to the moon in the sky and asked her, Ava, I want the moon. Will you get it for me? Why do you want it, son? She asked. I want to play with it. I will fetch a golden sparrow's nest and place the moon inside, and my brother, sister, and I will play with it, I replied. Okay, I'll give it to you in the morning, she said. No, I want it right now, I cried. But if I give it to you now, won't the whole world become dark? I promise I will give it to you in the morning, said Ava. Next morning, as soon as I woke up, I ran to her. Ava, where have you kept the moon? She nodded at me and said, look over there, that rope basket with a pot in it. I have put the moon inside that pot. If I take it out now, it will melt in the heat. I'll give it to you at night. If I ask her at night, she says she'll give it in the morning. And when I ask again in the morning, she says she'll give it at night. I decided that this just wouldn't do. One day, I was very stubborn. I told her that no matter what, she simply had to let me have the moon. She agreed. She brought down the basket, took out the pot, gathered the moon into her cupped hands. I stretched out my hands eagerly, hoping she would now give it to me. She pretended to do so, but instead suddenly raised her hands and threw the moon upward into the sky, pointing, there's the moon, look, there in the sky. I was enraged. So, you recall earlier in the story, this had already happened. He already knew that she wasn't giving him the moon. So I think this is what you call a flashback. I think that the story has gone back into the first time he asked her for the moon. And she didn't give it to him at night. She didn't give it to him in the morning. What's more, she threw it away up in the sky. I stretched out my hand eagerly. She pretended to give it, instead raised her hand. There is the moon, look, there in the sky. I could feel the tears coming. My grandmother looked at me and laughed. I was so angry, I wanted to break her teeth with a stone. But then Gudava didn't have a single tooth left in her mouth. Laugh as much as you want. I'll steal the moon one day and you won't even know. And then while you cry, I'll be the one laughing at you, I said to myself in a vengeful fit. I'm going to skip a little bit of the story. There's a piece of the story here where he reflects on his grandmother's ability to tell stories. All children love Gudava. As for her, we are as dear to her as life itself. She tells us many stories, makes us things to eat, teaches us new games. She teaches the girls to draw colorful rangoli designs, to make garlands with flowers, and to braid their hair into nice-looking plaits. As she tells her stories, she pokes the clouds with her staff, and they burst into rain. Sometimes she conjures intensely hot summers. Seas go into high tide. trees bloom and flowers blossom, the Maya Fakir crosses the 7 seas in one stride. There's a long bit about how well she tells stories. And again, one has to wonder, can she really like take her stick and poke the clouds and does it rain? And there's a wonderful illustration of that. It's the kind of book that you want to read aloud to someone right here next to you.